Alright, so we continue. This section will cover the 4 pawns attack. We start with d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6, and now white can play f4. So this move looks really dangerous because now white in some cases can simply play e5 and force the knight to go back and try to conquer the center. Now let's see what is the best reaction against it. Short castle, knight f3. Well, of course, to play e5 immediately is probably too early for several reasons. Black can even take and play knight d7 with idea c5, and then the center gets open and the white king is still only one. This is unpleasant. So first, white wants to develop his pieces, knight f3. Another possible move that has been played is the bishop d3, but then black plays knight c6, knight f3. Now d5 doesn't work because of knight d4 simply, and in the next move black wants to play c5. Knight c6, knight f3, bishop g4. Black quickly develops play against the pawn d4, now knight d7, d5, and still knight can go to d4. And black is, well, at least not worse. Instead of d5, if white plays bishop e2, black takes on f3, bishop takes f3, and e5. F takes e5, d takes e5, d5, and knight d4. After short castle, never take this terrible bishop on f3 because of g takes f3, and now you stay with a bad bishop on g7. So your knight on d4 is much stronger than the bishop f3. Just play c5 to support it once more, and your position is fine. Alright, so this is 6th bishop d3. Try to remember that whenever white plays bishop d3, the square d4 always becomes weak, and this is where black can have his counterplay. So knight f3 immediately is stronger. c5. And now white has a choice. The main move, of course, is d5. But let me show you what happens if he plays bishop e2. Well, this is kind of Sicilian then. After c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight c6. Black didn't do anything wrong, but white has made this move f4 already. And this is obviously not very good. And here is why. So bishop e3. Black takes on d4. Bishop takes d4. And black plays e5 immediately. F takes e5, d takes e5. Bishop takes e5, queen a5, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes back to d4. If the bishop goes somewhere else, like to f4, then knight takes e4, and black should win. Bishop d4 and rook d8. And here black has terrific compensation. I think his position might be even already won, because I don't see how white can protect the bishop d4 and the queen d1 altogether. So this is bishop e2. So this is bad Sicilian because of the pawn on f4. And taking on c5 is generally not good because after queen a5, white cannot take on d6. Knight takes e4 will follow. So to protect pawn e4, white plays bishop d3, then queen c5, and now white cannot castle because the queen disturbs. So he has to lose more time. Queen e2. Bishop g4, bishop e3, queen h5. The idea now is to take queen h5. The idea now is to take on f3 and to create white a double pounce, and then if white exchanges queens, black can attack the pawns by playing knight h5, bishop h6, and if white does not exchange queens, then he will have disrupted pawn structure and a weak king, because the queen is on board. So queen h5, short castle, knight c6. Now black wants to play knight d7, knight c5, and then probably knight e6, and again the square d4 plays the crucial role here. h3, bishop takes f3, rook takes f3, knight goes to d7, knight d5 and e6. And if white plays g4, then queen h4, and the position of black is better. Of course, white doesn't need to play knight d5, but if he wants to play against the black queen, then this is the way how he does it, but it doesn't bring much. And otherwise, the next move, knight d4 may follow. Okay, so this means that taking on c5 is not good too. So we are left with only possibility d5. And here, like in many cases, the best way for black to create counterplay is to play p5. The sooner, the better. C takes b5. If instead white plays e5, black can take on e5. F takes e5. Knight g4. C takes b5. Knight takes e5. Bishop e2, knight bd7. Short castle, knight takes f3. Bishop takes f3, knight e5. Bishop f4. a6. d6, rook a7. This variation is not forced, of course, but this is just an example how you can play. D takes e7 and queen takes e7. And the idea is to take on f3. The position is open. Open the bishop on g7 is strong, and I don't think that black has any problems here. So going too far with the pawns is also dangerous for white because his king is still in the center. So it's easier to stick with c takes b5, a6, white plays a4. Other possibilities are, for example, e5, but again, after e5, black takes on e5, f takes e5, and knight g4, attacking the pawn e5. Bishop f4, a takes b5, h3, b4, knight e4 and knight h6. The idea is to play knight f5. Also, a possible idea is to play f6, trying to open the position. So again, black has certain compensation here. Now let's check the principal continuation if white takes on a6. But this is usually the easiest for black almost always. Queen a5 first. Now pawn d3 hangs, so bishop d2. Bishop takes a6. Bishop takes a6. Queen takes a6. Queen goes to e2. Queen takes e2, king takes e2, and knight bd7. The idea is to play rook fb8. Pawn e4 is weak, so the knight on c3 has to protect it. If the king goes to d3, then black sometimes can play c4 and open the positions. There are still enough pieces to create danger against the white king. So all in all, in this position, black has enough compensation. You need to get some experience in these situations when you give up the pawn, so just play a couple of rapid games and you will see that indeed black has very good chances, not just to equalize, but to play for win. Okay, let's see two other moves in move number 9. Instead of taking on e6, queen c2. So this move is obviously made to protect the pawn e4. A takes b5, knight takes b5, bishop a6, a4, queen b6, rook a3, e6, d takes e6, f takes e6, bishop e2, knight c6. Here, obviously, black has enough counterplay. Square b4 is weak, square d4 is weak. Short castle, knight b4, queen b1, and d5. The queen on b1 looks terrible, of course, because knight on b4 takes all the squares. In addition, black has the 2 pawns in the center, c5 and d5. They are very strong, and all the pieces of black are very active, and therefore I think that his compensation is excellent. Alright, so last move before we go to the main line. Bishop d2, queen b6, a4 now, a takes b5, a takes b5. Sometimes you can see this idea that white keeps the pawn on b5 and tries to protect it, and that means that the knight cannot go to a6 before, or the bishop cannot go from c8 to a6. But even here, black has good compensation. Rook takes a1, queen takes a1, and e6. So in general, when you give up material, you have to play dynamically. So that's why black is always trying to open something, to change something in the position. D takes e6, f takes a6, bishop e2, rook e8, I'm sorry, bishop takes e6, bishop e2, rook e8, the rook goes on the open file, pawn e4 is kind of weak, short castle, and bishop b3. Pawn hangs, queen a3 doesn't work because of c4 check, and then knight will take on e4. So here again, black has compensation. And in general, taking on b5 with a pawn is good if white can play b4. If white cannot play b4, then he simply has double pawns, and black has compensation by definition. So, alright, last but main variation. a6, a4. So bishop b7, the idea of this move is to play e6 and to play against pawns d5 and e4. Also, black doesn't want to take immediately on b5 so that white does not develop himself too quickly with the bishop. So bishop b7, bishop e2. Now taking on a6 does not make much sense because the square before became weak, and the knight will go there in the next move. Also, sometimes there is a possibility for white to play b6, but here it doesn't work so well. Black first of all plays a5, not to allow white to play a5. Bishop b5, knight bd7. The idea is to take on b6 with the knight, short castle, knight b6. This takes a control over the square c4 in case white would like to go knight d2, knight c4, I'm sorry. So knight takes b6. f5. This is a nice opportunity. If instead of f5, white makes any other move like bishop e3, then black can play with d6. This is his main idea. But actually, after bishop e3, even knight g4 is possible, attacking the bishop. Bishop g3 doesn't work, and after h3, for example, then e6 works well. So f5, for example, g takes f5 and knight h4. This is an interesting attempt, but black can play e6, b takes e6, f takes e6, e takes f5 and e5 now. And now his pawns are very strong. He wants to play e4, d5, d4, all the pawns in the center, 3 pawns in the center against none of white. So g4, for example, then d5, g5 and d4. And if white takes, then black can take with however he wants, with a queen, for example, because 2 knights are hanging. So the position of black is simply better. So let's see. b6 seems not to work well, then white can play bishop e2. Now a takes b5, bishop takes b5, so white lost time, and the bishop is already on b7, and black plays e6. If white takes on e6, f takes e6, e5, then knight d5, again with compensation. White cannot take on d6 because of knight takes c3. If white takes on d5, then black will take with a pawn. White takes d6, and again, black has good compensation. e6, short castle, he takes d5, he takes d5, knight a6, knight may go to c7 or to b4, and from both squares he'll attack the pawn d5. f5, this is the only play of white, knight c7, bishop c4, now bishop a6. The idea of all these moves is to weaken the defense of the d5 pawn. After bishop takes a6, for example, rook takes a6, now black wants to go with queen to a8, both pawns a4, and d5 will be under attack. So white plays queen d3, queen c8, f takes g6. Now black surprisingly takes with the f pawn, but this makes sense because black, like this, brings his rook into the game. And this is the most important, since black is already down 1 pawn, he must care less about strategical aspects, so he has to play dynamically. That's what it is all about. And King's Indian is a very dynamic opening in general. F takes g6, b3, and now strong move queen f5. Queen takes f5, g takes f5. Now everything hangs in the position of white. Rook a2, knight d7, rook c2, knight b6, knight b5, bishop takes b5, a takes b5, and knight c takes d5. And it doesn't matter that the knight is pinned because in every move black can simply take on c4. So in this position is equal. There are some more moves to do. And what else? Here, if after knight b6, if white takes on a6, black can take with a rook, and the pawn d5 is very weak. It will fall eventually. So, well, yeah, this is one way to play against 4 pawns attacks. There are certainly also other ways, but what I have played in my life is based on this analysis of c5 and then b5 and a6. In order to play this position successfully, you need to get a feel for it, because you always give up a pawn, and it's like you have compensation, but it's not clear exactly what to do with it. So you just need to get some experience. After you get experience, preferred in rapid games, then you may achieve very good results in this variation with black. All right, so in the next section we will cover another variation called Zemish variation, where white will move the pawn not to f4 but to f3.